Good? All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you guys so much for showing up. We're really excited about this event. I'm Carol Mertz. I am the Vice Chair of the St. Louis chapter of the International Game Developers Association, which is who is putting this awesome event on for all of you. In case you don't know, we are basically a local chapter that is formed essentially to support, provide resources, and provide networking opportunities for game developers in the St. Louis area. Primarily for pros, but also for aspiring developers, and that's for both video games and tabletop and traditional games. So today we have Stuart Keating of Dioxin Dump Games talking about traditional game development, which is really exciting because Stuart most recently has actually had his game on Kickstarter 3 days until retirement, a game about cops on the edge, and he actually exceeded his goal by 300%. Because the game was presented so well and the rules were so exciting. So, without further ado, Stuart.
Thank you, Carol. And a special thanks to Carol and Wes. They actually found me because of the Kickstarter and invited me to the IGDA events, and it's been wonderful to meet everyone at the drink ups and see the games that people have been working on and talk shop and theory. It's really been wonderful, so I'm happy to be able to contribute. So, a long time ago, I was a middle school French teacher, believe it or not, and I discovered that not only can I not sit still for more than 10 minutes where you guys are, I can't sit still for more than 10 minutes where I am, at the front of the room. So I was thinking we would maybe break this up into about 5-10-minute segments, and we would do a Q&A on each of the segments as we go, if that makes sense. Okay, I see a lot of nods. You guys can talk, it's fine. I won't make you conjugate verbs, don't worry. So yeah, like Carol said, my name is Stuart Keating. I founded a game company last fall called Dioxin Dump Games. My original plan when moving to St. Louis was to become a lawyer. I moved here to go to law school, and I fell in love with the city. I graduated from law school, loved it, wanted to do environmental law. I was super fascinated with the Times Beach disaster out on Route 66, hence the name Dioxin Dump Games. And yeah. And I was a professional environmentalist up until I launched this game company, and it did well, and I realized that I could work part-time as an attorney and part-time as a game developer, and as long as I wasn't too picky about where I slept or what I ate, I'd get by. Yeah, so I'm from Oklahoma originally. I love St. Louis. I've been here for about 5 years now. I wish I'd gone to high school here. It would make every single conversation easier. I'll talk a little bit more about the theory behind Dioxin Dump Games and why I chose 3 days until retirement to be the pilot product for the game company, and why I ran that as a Kickstarter a little bit later, but I thought I would go through what we're going to talk about tonight. So I wanted to give you guys a history of tabletop gaming, and we're going to focus on probably wargaming and role-playing gaming because you guys are all familiar with Monopoly, and it's interesting, but really a lot of you are video game developers, right? Vast majority apps, video games. And the video gaming really is almost a direct outgrowth of role-playing games, which are a direct outgrowth of wargaming. So that's probably way more interesting. It's like learning about your great-grandfather rather than like your crazy uncle. So I thought we would talk about sort of the history of tabletop gaming, and then we would move into sort of the similarities and differences between tabletop gaming and video gaming, and why those similarities and differences are important and what that means for design on either side of the table. And then I thought we would talk about, since I just mentioned design, why design is so critically important in really all games, but especially important in tabletop games. And the big hint there is that math is hard. To give away the crux of that 10 minutes. After that, we're going to go into making, marketing, and selling tabletop games. And it'll be primarily a case study on the Kickstarter I ran and why I think it was successful, along with some obnoxious philosophizing. And then, continuing in the vein of obnoxious philosophizing, we'll go into the future of tabletop gaming, which I think that, right around the early to mid 90s, I remember subscribing to, it was like Strategy Games Plus or whatever, like the original PC Strategy Games magazine, and there was a whole thing about how tabletop gaming was dead, and clearly it's not. I mean, if Kickstarter has shown anything, it's that the market is not only there, it's actually more mature, and they have a lot more money they're willing to spend, and a lot of enthusiasm that people are really excited that people are making products for them. So I think that the future of tabletop gaming and the future of video gaming are tied together really well, and I think there's an interesting amount of discussion there. And depending on where we're at, we want to open that up and be like way more of just an open Q&A discussion, if that works. So I already talked about myself a little bit. Probably the only other thing that's really important is I grew up on a farm out in Chandler, Oklahoma, which is famous for its baseball camp, and that's about it. So I would develop these really complex role-playing games because I thought they were just so cool. My dad had a TV repair shop in Oklahoma City that was next to like a big Games Workshop store. So every time I'd have to go in and like sit and like look at the back of a TV for 8 hours because I was sitting in my dad's shop during the summer, I would always walk past these huge Warhammer 40K advertisements, you know, with like the Space Marines and the orcs and all that. And so I totally was just hooked on this huge monolithic gaming thing that I had no idea what it was. So I spent a lot of time developing role-playing games as a kid. But since I lived on a farm, and you know the nearest kids lived a couple miles away, I was like not only like the nerdy kid that was into role-playing games, it's like the nerdy kid that was like so into them that he had no one to play with. This is like, well, I think this would work really well. I think this is cool. And so I did that. And then we got a computer when I was like 11 or something, and I got really into developing computer games. But it was like way more of like I'd go get an O'Reilly book from the library and like, you know, try to figure out how C++ worked, and it was a big teenage mess. You guys are familiar with those. And so I loved rules so much, I ended up, after a many twists and turns, becoming a lawyer. So rules are literally my day job. Not fun rules, but like rules like, here's how we can get your traffic ticket knocked down so that it's not points on your license, and here's how we can get your divorce squared away. That sort of thing. And it's fun, but it's not as fun as, you know, slaying orcs. Maybe it isn't. Depends on the day. One of them pays better than the other. And so that's me in a nutshell. And so I think that the most important thing to remember about tabletop gaming, and when I say tabletop gaming, I'm referring to the whole corpus of games, but really more specifically to wargaming and then the role-playing games that have come out of that, and a lot of the modern games. They're really a narrative. I mean, they're nothing more than a mechanism for you and some other people to get together and create a story together. It's collaborative storytelling with essentially some dice rolling or card playing involved. And so without digging into sort of the difference between board games and card games, because you're all familiar, you've played poker, you've played Monopoly, you've flipped the boards over in Risk, you have booked all sorts of things in spades. You guys are familiar with this. I think that the two most important things about tabletop gaming are, one, the physicality. And I know that we have a lot of video game developers in here, and I'm a huge, huge fan of video games. But I think that there is something to purchasing, and really when you look at the way video games used to be marketed and sold, there's something to the physicality. You get this big box that has a big like gold embossed, you know, logo, and it's got special stuff in it, and it's got a physical game manual that you can read through. I think MechWarrior 2 was one of the best of this, and the old Ultima games that had like the cloth map of whatever Lord Britain had thought up, or British, whatever his name was. I think that the physicality is really important, and I think that in an era where we're getting so much information and so much interaction digitally, I think physicality has become so much more important. And I think the other really important thing is interaction. And I think that probably one of the biggest cognitive leaps for video games was a leap towards interaction. And that's certainly, I know that a lot of the games I've played that you guys have developed, Hive Jump, which I recently backed on Kickstarter. By the way, who here has heard of Hive Jump? Who here has backed it on Kickstarter? All right, everyone's hands by like tomorrow morning should go up. It's a great thing. It's a lot of fun, and it's very collaborative and interactive, which is super, I think super important for video games. And I think there's some things to learn about interaction from tabletop games for video game developers. So those are really the two hooks for me for developing tabletop games, so physicality and interaction. And we'll just dig in really quickly. You know, a really historic game called chess. I don't know if you guys have heard of chess. Chess is obviously, no chess, no. Chess is something that we think of as basically being an abstraction for brain power and the ability to know how moves work in strategy, right? It's a strategic game. But chess is also a simulation, right? It's a simulation of medieval warfare, where you have knights that can move through blocks of infantry. The infantry provides streams for the other big units, which are moving around and trying to control the center of the field. You know, chess is nothing more than the original war game. It's the original simulation. And I think that why wargaming developed separately from board games and card games is that board games and card games were very much a simulation, but it was supposed to be like way more of an abstraction. Like, ha ha ha, I'm a slumlord, you owe me $400 because you landed on my property, you're bankrupt. Oh, I'm having so much fun, right? Like, that's that's Monopoly in a nutshell. You're like bankrupting your grandma. My grandma's really good at Monopoly, actually. She kicked my ass a lot. But wargaming, on the other hand, was the abstraction was there, but their whole goal, rather than becoming more and more abstract because they wanted to have fun, you'll learn, I don't know how many of you played war games, but they're not about fun, that's for certain. War games were way more about recreating battlefield scenarios, so it was way more of just a pure skill thing. And so the original war games were, I think, Prussian cavalry officers that were trying to figure out how they could gain, there weren't enough wars to go around for them to gain the experience they needed for the promotions they wanted. So they invented their own wars. They put together these really cool, just little blocks of wood, essentially, that they would move around, and they could mimic terrain, and they could create point values for each of the units. And they could, like, oh, this unit of Hussar cavalry gets an advantage here, and we'll do a little bit of fiddling. And you could it was totally like I'm a better general than you type thing. So it's a really competitive thing, and it's a competitive thing that ties into a very strict simulation. And I think that's really the important step away, because the whole idea was, how can we mechanically recreate as close as possible the physical world? And anyone that's played Dungeons & Dragons, especially 3.5 or Pathfinder 3.75, which is a whole different thing, knows that like the whole point in that is it's 3 fucking books of rules. Like obnoxious rules designed to recreate, like, okay, well if I want to swing a sword while I'm on a horse and the thing I'm trying to hit is occasionally immaterial because it's an air elemental, how does that work mechanically? Right, like, if I want to get into a drinking contest with a rock troll, who metabolizes alcohol? You can find rules for this shit. They're out there. People are crazy. Like, but the whole idea, there's this whole tendency towards recreating the physical environment. And I think it's something that we're a little spoiled because we've grown up with it, right? Everyone's played video games. Like, you totally understand this whole, like, immersion in a fantasy world, like, from the get-go. The original war games were very serious, and it was entirely block units, right? Like Marcio of Pike and Shot. I read a lot of Wikipedia. And how does that work? Well, at some point, people decided, wouldn't it be cool if, we had these like cool things going where we had blocks of cavalry and infantry moving around, but wouldn't it be cool if we also had, like Charlemagne come out and fight Napoleon in a broadsword battle, and we had rules for medieval combat that we could figure out with dice and figure out with numbers and metrics, and so they did that. And of course, it being the late 60s and early 70s, it was really only a matter of like months where someone was like, well, what if we added wizards? And how many of you guys are familiar with like historical war gamers? You guys know any of those? They tend to be like, have gray beards and grumble a lot. Angry people, very angry, hate fun. Game a lot, but hate fun. Traditional war gamers. They super hated that idea. They were super mad that someone was like, well, I cast Fireball on your cavalry and they're dead. For some reason that rubbed them the wrong way. So Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson got kicked out of their gaming groups because they had dared to think about a world that was no longer a real physical world. So essentially they were trying to create as much as possible a simulation of a fictional abstract world, which is something that we're totally comfortable with, but at the time is a total mindfuck, right? You have this total like idea where you're like, we're gonna recreate, we're gonna control for weather and gravity, and we're gonna control for whether or not our horses have been, adequately nourished, and like all this shit, but it's on a fictional world, and there are monsters and magic. And it's a really great, awesome idea that I think that we sort of take for granted, which is cool. It's cool, but it's also, there's a lot of really interesting mental and perception processes that are going on. And I think that's a huge part of why people still play tabletop games. There's still that sense of exploration and that sense of like engineering, DIY, how do we make this work? So that's kind of what I have to say about the history of tabletop gaming. There are some excellent works out there. Of Dice and Men is a fantastic book that goes through the history of gaming and then really digs into the history of Wizards of the Coast and TSR, Tactical Space Rules. And their later acquisition by Hasbro and the whole great interpersonal drama behind all of it. So I highly recommend that as a starting point for learning. Do we have any questions?
Well, yeah, I have a question. Too, actually.
Okay.
So where do you see tabletop going in the future? Mm-hmm. And what are the obstacles that need to be overcome for people developing?
Okay. So I think tabletop gaming in the future is a really interesting IGDA, and I think there's a lot out there. Something that's really, really exciting about tabletop gaming now is that there's a lot of automation involved. There are some great companies, Panda in China, for example. They have sculptors on staff, they have artists, graphic designers, they can produce pretty much anything you want to design. So if you have the money, you can produce a complicated game that has like super gorgeous 28mm miniatures for wholesaler, large producer prices. So you can produce, a pallet of these games for like $5,000 and turn around and sell each of them for $75 a piece. And they're like super unique minis that would be completely unthinkable even 10 years ago. So I think the future of tabletop gaming, especially for things like tactical miniatures and board games, is a future of a lot more experimentation and a lot more small-scale development because of the way that globalization has affected how we can produce things, and automation, especially robotic automation, has affected how cheaply we can produce things. And I think that the bigger obstacles still are coming up with new, I hate the word paradigm shift. It's totally like I'm in a hotel conference room and trying to sell you guys on something. We're gonna have a paradigm shift, and at the end of the day, it is what it is, and we're gonna exploit synergies. Like, no, but I think that one of the obstacles to tabletop gaming is trying to, it's like writing genre science fiction, right? Everyone's got the great idea for a sci-fi novel, but it's gonna end up being Star Wars. So there's this idea that there's this great, amazing, huge body of work out there already, and figuring out ways to see mechanics or see themes differently that allow you to produce a game that is unique and fun at the same time, which is, we're going to talk about that a little later. It turns out that's real hard to do. So yeah, do we have any other questions? It's like 6 p.m., not like 10. All right, well, let's jump over to talk about tabletop games and video games. So I think that the first thing we should do is we should talk about the ways they're similar, and then we'll break them down and talk about how the differences impact things. So I think that the first thing, and again, tabletop games, we're talking wargaming, tactical miniatures, role-playing games versus Monopoly or chess or checkers or anything. So tabletop games and video games are essentially narratives, right? When you're making a video game, unless you're making Flappy Bird, which, by the way, thank you, I love Flappy Bird. Flappy Fedora is actually my favorite.
Maverick Bird, have you played Maverick Bird?
I haven't.
It's by Terry Kavanaugh, who is the guy who did Super Hexagon. Yeah. It's amazing.
Maverick Bird?
Yes.
All right, does it involve, like, is it Top Gun themed?
No, it's basically Flappy Bird with Super Hexagon graphics and really awesome soundtrack.
Oh, super hit, yeah. So the Flappy Bird games don't necessarily have a narrative aside from I'm a bird and there are pipes that are coming out of the ground and paradoxically out of the sky and I have to fly between them, and it's really hard. A lot of games have narratives, right? And the games that you really work on, and I've played some of your games, they excel because the narratives are super unique and they're super engaging and they allow people to tell a story, right? At heart, we're all storytellers. We tell stories about ourselves, who we are, where we come from, what's important to us, why it's important to us, and why we're all sitting in this room in the basement of the Science Museum and listening to me talking about games instead of watching the animatronic dinosaurs. Probably where I would be. I've heard this. I mean, it's constantly in my head. So yeah, so I think that games and games of all sorts are narratives in ways that TV shows and movies and novels and magazines wish they were, right? Everyone's like, oh, if someone would just pick up my great American novel and get through the first 300 pages, which are entirely set in the same neighborhood in New York, they would totally, like, it's the human condition in this narrative, right? Video games are like, well, shit, I'll sit down here and click this button and see what happens. And suddenly I'm drawn into a story, right? I'm like playing in this thing and it's engaging. It's not like a passive consumption of narration, it's an active participation. And I think that probably for a lot of us on a conscious or subconscious level, that's why we do what we do. We love the idea of telling a story that someone else can play around. It's cool, like it's like Legos. Legos are fun, but this and that. So narratives are probably one of the places where things are very similar, and I'll go through some differences here in a bit. I think the other big thing is that both games, and we talked about this earlier, are simulations, right? We're simulating to a certain extent a fictional or real world or a set of situations. Settlers of Catan, you're literally going in and colonizing an island and industrializing. I was going to make up something about Minecraft, but Minecraft kind of defies the simulation angle. And we'll talk about Minecraft here in a minute because I think it's got some interesting things to it. But they're both simulations, right? We're basically we're creating a fictional world or an abstraction of that world and setting it as a stage that we can all act upon. And then the third thing that is really the big similarity is that in video games as well as in tabletop games, you have to try to balance verisimilitude with ease of play. Right? Everyone's familiar with like with like EVE Online, which is basically a tactical spreadsheet simulator. Where it's very much like, in theory, you're like riding around in a spaceship and doing cool stuff and mining ore, but you're really just looking at numbers and you get angry. Or maybe you don't, I don't know. I like spreadsheets sometimes recreationally. But yeah, there's a constant striving for balance between creating this super realistic, believable world, like in Gone Home, right? Has anyone who's played Gone Home? Yeah, I mean, you're really doing nothing more than walking around and turning on lights and opening doors, right? That's all you're doing.
Throwing binders.
What?
Throwing binders.
Yeah, throwing binders at things and reading all of your little sister's deep, dark secrets. But it's a very realistic world. And it's cool because it's contained to an entire house. And it's very, very, very realistic. And the reason that they were able to get away with that was that their story was compelling, and they completely eschewed any other ideas in favor of just going for this absolute realism. Like the effect they were going for hinged on you being completely sold on this being a realistic experience. And then you have things like Minecraft, which are just bizarre, right? It's a total like fictional world where things don't make sense, but you go with it. Like, well, yeah, of course I can put this saddle on this pig and ride it off a cliff. Of course I'll be rewarded for that behavior. Sure. And it works, right? But it's also not very realistic, but you're totally bought into that. And the idea comes in that you're trying to buy the participants in your story in on not only your fictional world, but their level of engagement with the realism of that world. And I think that it's something that can be pretty hard to do with video games. And I think that in certain ways, tabletop games make it a lot easier, depending on the players, but it's way more of a subtle thing to get it right. So let's go through some differences on this. I think that one of the really big differences, and this is Team Tabletop over here, we have unbounded narratives on our team, and I think unbounded narratives are cool. And what I mean by an unbounded narrative is, if I want the king of the fictional kingdom in whatever role-playing game I'm running to be a dog, dude can be a dog. And like, if I want him to not be a dog, but instead be a plant that's mimicking a dog, that can happen. And it can happen just because I got super drunk before I ran the game and changed my mind at the last minute. It's completely unbounded. And if the players want to go completely off the rails, which if any of you have played Dungeons & Dragons know, players will go off the rails. And like, set fire to villages and be horrible assholes and like, well yeah, we were gonna go to that dungeon and like save those people, but instead we're gonna terrorize the countryside. Well, we can do that. There are rules for that. Let me consult the rule book. Right? We have unbounded narratives. And I think unbounded narratives are really cool in some ways, and I think there are drawbacks. And I think that that's something that video games have really tried for. And if you look at a lot of video game marketing, video games are trying to push for this unbounded narrative, right? We have rich dialogue options. Everyone points to the Walking Dead video game. I've never actually played the Walking Dead video game, but I've heard a lot about it, about the girl and whether or not you kill the girl and what it means for the story, right? So you have these branching plot stories, and you have these dialogue trees, and you can have a lot of combinations of things you can do. But at the end of the day, there's an edge on the map. Even in Minecraft, which is like 64 times the square footage of the surface of the Earth, there's an edge to the map eventually, right? It's because we're using a limited system, and the way I like to describe it is dreaming, right? If you're creating a video game, all you're doing, and I say all you're doing, what you're doing, and it's tremendous, is you're basically taking a dream and you're making it this big, cool bubble with all the neat stuff in it, and you're putting it somewhere so that someone else can later walk into that dream and play around inside the dream, right? But they can't go outside the dream. It's out there, and you're off having other dreams. With tabletop games, if the rules are written right and you have the right people playing the game, the dream is simultaneous, right? I sit down with the players, or the person who's running the game sits down with the players, and they say, okay, here's what here's some basic rules about the world. Here's some basic rules about how mechanics work. Let's see what develops, right? So it's kind of a unbounded versus bounded narratives I think are important, and I think that unbounded narratives can be especially scary to people, and this is going to come up here in a minute, because there's a price and weight to freedom. If you can do literally anything, if you can go anywhere, interact with anything, it's a scary moment, right? That's not something that we're used to in 21st century America. like we have rules for everything we do. We live in a society governed by rules, and I, as a lawyer, again, I think this is important that we have rules that we all agree to follow. But we don't have the ultimate freedom that you can have as a protagonist in a science fiction story, or that you can have in a role-playing game. And so there's a little bit of paralysis, and there's a little bit of you know, like reversion to type and stereotype. And I think that really good role-playing game, really good tabletop game design sort of eases players through that. I think the other super big difference, I brought this up earlier, is that math is hard. So like, I am pretty sure that after years of being a huge dork and rolling 20-sided die, I know that 1d12 plus 3 is probably not as good as 2d6 plus 1, where crit range is 16 to 20. And I apologize if that didn't sound arcane, because you spent a lot of time reading rule books. But math is hard, right? And one of the huge benefits of video games, one of the reasons that video games have conquered the gaming world, is because you guys, as excellent game designers, can abstract that math away from the player. So even if you love math, even if you love, and I mean, I think I do love math, but combat in a role-playing game is a very long and drawn-out process. It's not like I swing my sword, it's like I do this, and then we stop for a few seconds, and we roll dice, and we figure out numbers, and there's a lot of really nerdy shit that goes on. Someone gets up and goes and gets a beer, and someone else eats a piece of pizza, and it breaks the narrative. It breaks the flow. It requires a pretty significant suspension of disbelief that these actions are happening in 6 seconds. In a video game, you can swing the sword and, like, you know, cut the head off something, and cool, you're moving on to the next thing. The math has been taken care of for you. And I think that's a huge benefit to video games, and I think it's something that a lot of tabletop gamers now, when they're designing their games, don't quite realize. They see all the cool stuff that video game developers are doing, and they say, well, I'll just do this as well, and you can't do that. I mean, you simply can't. It's like trying to race an automobile with a bicycle. I mean, you can't. It's a fundamentally different mode of transportation. I think that the other thing, and this falls in with math being hard and sort of that idea of freedom also being hard, is learning curves, perceived and real learning curves. So whenever I play every video game, whether it's Skyrim or online Scrabble or Minesweeper, as if it were a hack and slash. Like, I'm seriously just hitting the space bar over and over and over, and I'm like, all right, this is gonna work. And 2/3 of the time it works, you know. I also play a lot of hack and slash games because I'm good at those, because I can just hit the same button over and over. But, you know, for me, the perceived learning curve on those games is really short, right? It's easy, super easy. Whereas the real learning curve, and those of you that have developed video games know, that you can build some really cool strategies into your games. And they're really cool, deep strategies. So there's this idea that the perceived learning curve is easy, and you, the omnipotent game designer, have developed all these really cool iterative strategies, tutorial levels, you know, messaging, signals, to get people to learn the game on an unconscious level. Like, you can play something like Fallout New Vegas for a couple of hours, and you can totally learn how all the mechanics in the game work and what good strategies are just from the game. And I think tabletop games have this opposite problem where the real learning curve can actually be pretty easy, and I'll explain why here in a minute, but the perceived learning curve is hard. Who here has wanted to play something like Dungeons & Dragons and hasn't? Okay, in the back, bluish, blackish, purple hair, and colorblind. Why did you not get into playing? Opportunity, okay, and that's something that's actually part of talking about the audience later. Opportunity is a big part of it. The other big part is you have things like funny-sided dice, and there's a whole lingo, 2d6 versus hitting the space bar. There's a whole lingo. There's this perceived learning curve that it's an arcane thing where you have to keep track of things, like keep track of how much all your equipment weighs, and it seems like a lot of work. It seems like record keeping is your entire job. So the perceived learning curve is hard. But if a game is running well and the people are all sort of on the same boat, really the only question that should ever come up in a tabletop, like pen and paper role-playing game is, well, what do you want to do? The person that's running the game says, okay, here's what's going on. What do you want to do? And someone says, I want to hit it with my axe. I've been running a Dungeons & Dragons game for a while because my friends and I love to drink heavily. And we realized we could sit around and drink heavily and do nothing and feel kind of bad about it, or we could sit around and drink heavily and kill goblins. And tell you which one wins out, killing goblins. My downstairs neighbor, who is like, I think she spent most of her childhood and young adulthood beating up people like me. Like, she's a scary, scary lady. She plays a barbarian in our gaming group. I ask her what she wants to do. She says, I want to run at the lizard and I want to jump at the guy that is impaled on the spear through his chest and I want to cut the dude's head off. And I say, okay, here's how I think we can do that. Here's what you need to do. So she doesn't have to know math, she has to know what she wants to do, she has to know what she's good at, and she has to have an idea of what she can expect, right? It's totally managing expectations. And it works. You know, she's never the one that's like negotiating for a better treasure because they saved the princess. She's the one that's like, well, I mean, we could just keep the princess and kill the king. It's an option, he's right there, that's axe, right? She's getting exactly what she wants out of the game, and it's not mechanics. It's not the mechanics that are doing it for her, it's the experience. And so, the perceived learning curve that it's a big, nerdy, arcane thing is based entirely upon the marketing of it, the design of the games, and the way that the games are perceived. And it's a really easy hurdle to get over. And so that's kind of where we're at in terms of what I think the main differences are between tabletop games and video games. Do you have any questions? Yes?
For what you're saying about the narrative plot in video games, I think there's kind of counterpoint to that.
Okay.
Because when you look at something, especially in Elder Scrolls, the big model game, people unlock those narratives. You didn't know unlock those narratives yourself.
That's true.
Really take part in them, even though you didn't take part in the
I think that's very true, and there are bigger settings and plot things that can happen, and you could even incorporate new mechanics, but it does. I think that the difference that I'm really trying to get at is it lacks a little bit of the spontaneity, right? You know, like if I want to go visit a village of the Quota, like mythical frog people somewhere, I can't just do that. You know, like I've got to learn how to mod. I have to learn how to read the modding forums for Elder Scrolls, which is a whole other thing, and deal with that. And then I got to learn how to mod and do it, and I'm a terrible, terrible artist. You don't even want to see the stuff I've done. But I understand what you're saying. Like that that there is the bounded narrative isn't just a specific thing. It can grow over time and it's iterative, right? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's part of this drive for a lot of video games, especially a lot of medieval sword and sorcery video games, to achieve this sort of universal whole world sandbox feel.
And the other thing is games kind of teach you just a lot of video games that have a fair amount of teaching you play and playing, like Magic the Gathering.
Right.
Most, like, once you know, there's a little bit of rules, but I mean, not beyond the rules that you need to know to sit down and play a video game. You know, this is the controller, this is how the controller works, this is how you play the game. Once you know that Magic the Gathering is basically cards and what they say on it, you gotta play it.
Right. And I think that Magic the Gathering is a really good example of good tabletop game design, because there are just a few simple rules, and the strategy comes out of the interaction of those rules, and the fact that Wizards of the Coast is like, screw y'all, we're going to put out a new whole thing that totally changes things every 6 months and make a lot of money. I was at Wizards Wagon when they were having the big draft release for the most recent thing. It was serious business. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that a lot of tabletop games can be simple to learn, but I think that if you were to walk into the average game shop or cafeteria and you see people playing Magic the Gathering, and you're not familiar with that sort of experience, it's going to seem really crazy. And you're like, wait, what? You're a wizard and you have cards, and it comes down to like the real learning curve versus the perceived learning curve. And I think a good role-playing game, a good tabletop game, teaches you to play as you play. And Catan is a really good example of that, because Catan gets more complex the longer the game goes. Do we have other questions? Yes, Wes.
So I worked on a digital version of a physical version that was made. It was like a text-based kind of strategy game. Depending on the class level, you can use certain you have certain units and offense. And one of the things that we need to do is thinking of things as a video game, and then thinking of things as a board game, thinking of doing. was when you walk into somebody involving a company, what I want to see is before I make the account, I want to see, okay, if I roll 1, I have like 0, like, if I roll 1 through 3, I have like 0 percentage.
Right.
If I roll 7, I have this percentage, and I want to see those percentages up front and use all that knowledge to learn how to strategically place myself and this particular game. They want to do abstract from that and read it as, well, you have to manually look at your attack and think about what possible rivals are.
Right.
And figure that, like, and do that math in your head before you make that attack, so it's all in play. We totally, like, didn't, like, our philosophies were totally at odds and what's that when you shouldn't.
Right.
What do you, I don't know if I want to ask, like, what do you think you were right, but...
No, I mean, I'm like, in true facilitator fashion, I'm not going to say who was right. So, I don't know if you guys behind Wes could hear him. This room is kind of directional and there's awesome air conditioning and heating in here. He was saying that he was working on a tabletop, digitizing a tabletop game with some people that had designed this tabletop game. And he wanted it such that whenever there was a combat interaction, he would be able to see the chances of success and failure and what would happen beforehand. Like, you know, if you hover over an enemy in something like Command & Conquer, you can see a couple of stats about them. And they wanted it to be an entirely, like, you had to do the math on your own and just know what was going on. And he said that it was a piece of the philosophy, like it was opposing philosophies such that, like, they just couldn't really reconcile it. And he wanted to know who was right. Always a good question.
They wanted to do it.
What? Oh, they were paying you, so they won. Yeah, always. So, and I think that what really comes in here is sort of the way the game is designed. And I think from a tabletop game perspective, they're probably correct, because if you're sitting down to play a tabletop game like that, you kind of know, like, you have a D6, you know that you're going to roll a 4, 5, or 6 half the time, and you know that you're going to roll a 1, 2, or 3 half the time, and it sort of builds on this inbuilt notion that people that are really familiar with tabletop games are really good at the mechanics and really understand the mechanics intuitively. And I think that can be a problem for developing tabletop games, and we're actually going to talk about this here in a few minutes. So, hey, thanks for building into the next section. It's great. It's almost like, I don't think I actually sent you the outline for this, but it's almost like I did.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Unless there's more on that one.
The only other thing is, like, I think that from a video game standpoint, especially a tactical video game where timing doesn't matter, I think you should totally be allowed to see the way that the numbers are going to work, because A, it's probabilistic, so it's not like, okay, well, I'm definitely going to kill this dude, so I should do that. You're like, okay, well, I have a 75% chance of knocking this huge emplacement out over here if I devote all my resources this way, or I can split my resources around the board and do stuff. I think that for a computer game, what you're going to get at more is a much more, what you can do because of the way that video games, computer games work, since the math can be a little more abstract and taken care of for you, is you can play around a lot more with resource management rather than just crunching numbers as you go. And so I think that the true Zen answer is that the two games, even though the rules might be the same, the two games, because of the gameplay differences being so different, are different games with different expectations. So, and you have a question?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to word it yet. It's the line from tabletop games into video games chronologically makes perfect sense. So it's like, you know, you said like grandchildren, so to speak,
right?
Or something like that. So I guess my question is, do you ever see it go the other way? In your experience, like doing tabletop, playing tabletop, like, you know, I think of like the game Dark Tower. You ever play that? You know, it's like kind of computer in the center of the game.
Right.
I don't see so much of that kind of stuff anymore. I'm wondering if, like, I don't know, in your opinion, like, when does it go the other way? What have you seen in terms of video games and things like that?
So I think the part of me that sees some of the larger video game studios as cynical, cash-grabbing monsters, they see a really potential lucrative expansion market, and they maybe don't. I don't know. You see a lot of video game tie-in tabletop products, and they're not necessarily bad.
Like Angry Birds. They have that whole agenda that's bizarre.
Yeah, but exactly, right? So things like Angry Birds, which is maybe the ultimate cynical, cash-grabbing monster of all of them ever. Right, so I mean, speaking as a tabletop game developer, I steal the shit out of some video game ideas. Like, I see something that's cool in a video game, and I'm like, man, I totally want to take that and figure out what's fun with it and figure out how I can recreate this experience, this fun experience I'm having in a tabletop game, or in like a weekly D&D campaign, how I can make this really cool thing that just happened to me in some crazy space game work. And I think some kind of cool stuff that you can see is like Shadowrun is a really good example of this. And of course it's Shadowrun because it's already like a weird mishmash of tabletop and computer, and that's built into everything. But like the resurgence of Shadowrun as a computer game, some of the stuff they developed for that as part of the Kickstarter Shadowrun campaign moved towards and down into the newest rule set. And so, and from a personal standpoint, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Earthbound video game, the old Super Nintendo RPG Earthbound. I am like trying to figure out how I can get them to give me the tabletop development rights for that. Because Earthbound, as an intellectual property, would make the absolute most fun role-playing game I think possible. Like you're goofing off in like a weird, surreal suburban America with like really weird nonsense monsters, and you're hitting things with baseball bats and like frightening things. Like, I think that for a group of people that are now having children, like, and a lot of the D&D people have kids. I actually play with a guy that started playing Dungeons & Dragons with the original rulebooks in 1976, and I go gaming with him and his 12-year-old son and some other people every other week. And there's this total generational divide going. And so, when there are a lot of not old, 80s and 90s IP intellectual property out there for computer and console games that I think are really ripe for development, and like a lot of the concepts that were in there, like a lot of the Super Nintendo RPGs especially were really boundary pushing at the time, and they were really pushing with like themes and mechanics and storyline. There's a lot there that has not been mined back out, and there's totally this like sort of, I think that up until very recently there's been a very snobby, like, you know, pure-bloodedness to tabletop gamers. They're like, oh well, those people that can't do math in their heads, you know, we don't want what they have. And what ended up happening is we saw a total suffering. Like these people doubled down on like the super Tolkien, super traditional, you know, gaming. And then when 4th edition came out, they were like, oh well, we should maybe like sort of jump a little bit ahead and try to do some tactical combat stuff. But they totally, like, their complete aversion to a lot of the modes of gameplay and the fun experiences people were having with a computer has sort of bit them in the ass a little bit, and we're finally seeing that recover. Yes?
Yeah, to kind of go along with that, there's reference in Dark Tower and game that like had an actual computer.
Yeah.
There was a game released in 2008 called Spacelord that ran off CDs that presented some models.
Really?
Yeah, but I think it seems that the trade nowadays is mostly using technology as supplemental actions to games.
Right.
Like, yeah, there are games that use timers, apps that are downloaded, you guys showing apps. Munchkin has like a tracker app.
Munchkin has a tracker.
And there are 10 apps to generate the quality replacement apps. Yeah, it just seems to be a lot of supplemental app development for games rather than depending on actual games.
Right, and this is something that I wanted to touch upon briefly towards the end when we talked about the future of role-playing games. And it's a great example. Steve Jackson Games, who put out Munchkin. The first game he worked on was a game called Ogre. I went and bought it. The game weighs 37 pounds. It's huge. I mean, I was going to bring it tonight to show you guys. I was going to bring Munchkin and this game to show you the difference between the two. But Ogre is a huge game. And it looks super, the whole idea is that one person is a gigantic tank that can shoot nukes. The other person is everything else. And you move around the hex grid, and that's the entire game. And it seems like this big intimidating thing, because like I sat there for like 4 hours and punched out little cardboard counters, like thousands of them, while my friends drank and laughed at me. And then we started playing the game, and you can play the game in fucking 30 minutes. Like it's a 30-minute, the game is this huge thing, and you can play a basic game in 30 minutes because the entire dice rolling mechanic has been abstracted to an app. So if you have a smartphone, there's an app that allows you to say, I'm this unit versus this unit, these modifiers apply, and it tells you what happens. I don't know how many of you are really into the old school renaissance that's OSRs, OSRs. We'll talk about that as an example of generational divides in a little bit. But essentially, people were really, the people that were really excited about the original Dungeons & Dragons and the second edition, the really lethal stuff that like people think of when they think they're not having fun in Dungeons & Dragons, they decided it'd be fun to go back to that and like cut out all the crap that happened from like 1998 forward. And they've done that, and there's a huge culture out there. There's a game called Dungeon Crawl Classics Role-Playing Game that is, the mechanics are weird. It involves a lot of it. It involves like a 3-sided dice and a 5-sided dice. And I actually got in a huge argument with a friend because he gave me I was telling him about the 3-sided dice, and he was like, he gave me a 4-sided die, and he says, take a side away from that. I dare you. Like, go on, try it. It's like a 4-sided die is a pyramid. You can't physically take a side away from it and have a 3-dimensional object. But it uses the weirdest dice, and the mechanics are weird. It has a lot of charts. It's designed to be purposely obtuse. But to counteract that, they built an app that does everything for you if you want that. And so I, being the good dungeon master, game master, since trademark that I am, I totally like knew everything by the books with the dice. There's dice everywhere. But my players all use the phone. They use their phone. And it's like, they're like Instagramming photos of like them surreptitiously feeding my dog pizza. Like, and they're like, oh shit, rolling to attack, D20 +3. And so it's cool. Like the supplemental technology, I think, helps with some of the hiding the math from the players like we talked about. And I don't think the math should always be hidden, but that's a design standpoint on my end. I think the math should be sort of intuitive. And I think that to the extent that an app sort of speeds up action while still allowing you to kind of say, these two different items are different because they have different mechanics behind them. Like a short sword versus a long sword. Always go for the long sword. Mathematically, it just makes like a 1d8 versus 1d6 is tremendous difference. Yeah, that's kind of one of the other exciting intersections is using an app to sort of smooth out some of the rougher edges and the perceived learning curve. Yes?
And that's what he was talking about. So in 4th edition, I remember getting a lot of flack about being too much like going for like actual video games. I remember like on my people and that, just taking away all the fun stuff, everything was grid-based combat games. And instead of having UA, you get power cards, basically like you're preparing for a file. You use 5 abilities and you use them, put the card over using them, and basically saying,
right.
And I mean, it is for the video game world to make it easier. I mean, I would love it.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good example, actually. So, for those of you not familiar with edition wars, which are, it's a 2-word phrase that should rightly send shudders down your spine, the people that were really bought into the 3.5 edition of Dungeons & Dragons got really upset because the 4th edition of Dungeons & Dragons went in a different direction. It focused on precise movement and placement of your person in combat, and it was way focused on combat. And the idea was that even though the rules emphasized combat, if you wanted the other role-playing stuff, you could do it. They just weren't going to provide rules for it. And the discussion was that Wizards, or at least Wizards at that point, was trying to move towards video games and just focusing exclusively on combat, which at the time, wow, I've never played World of Warcraft. I had enough trouble kicking smoking that I just didn't need that going on. So the idea was that World of Warcraft is pretty much, combat, fetch quests, essentially. You play to see your numbers go up. And that's probably a gross oversimplification, and I apologize. The edition of Dungeons & Dragons moved towards that at the expense of, like, having tea with the High Priest of Elor, the God of Sun, and role-playing out this big, gorgeous thing. The idea was that you could still do it within the confines of the game, but there wasn't like a whole supplemental 50-page rule book about how to do it. And we're going to talk about that when we talk about some of the design stuff. Do we have any other questions? So we're going to switch over to designing a tabletop game and some sort of my experiences with 3 days until retirement and the design decisions I made and why I made them. So I think that since video games allow you to do a lot, like video games will do a lot of heavy lifting when you're designing them, right? The graphics are there, you don't have to rely on someone to imagine exactly what you're showing them. They can abstract out the math. I decided for 3 days until retirement that I was going to figure out the exact theory of fun that I wanted the game to have, why the game was fun, what fun experience the players would have, and I would design the game outward from that theory of fun. The idea being that, like, unlike, there's like a Steam sale, right? And I am the ultimate victim of Steam sales. I'm like, well, that's $8. Like, that's 15% off. That's a great deal. I do it all the time. I bought WazHack today, which I haven't played yet, but I'm excited about. It's supposed to be really good. So it's a roguelike. It's a whole thing. But asking someone to like sit down and play a video game that you've made for like 15 minutes to see how they like it is one thing. Going up to someone and saying, hey, I have this book here that has a bunch of rules in it, and it's a game I wrote that's supposed to be like 80s cop action films, and it's going to take like 3 hours, but I promise it'll be worth it if you want to sit down and play it, right? People are like, ooh, I don't know, like the buy-in is way more, and it's way more awkward because you're sitting down with people, right? There's a physicality to it. You have to have the physical stuff. And the interactive part, you have to have other players to play. You have to sit down, and you have to let your guard down a little bit and be willing to be silly and goofy. And it's totally, I think it's a fine thing, but like something that you have to do with tabletop games so much more than video games, especially niche tabletop games. Like Dungeons & Dragons is always going to be Dungeons & Dragons. They're always going to sell hundreds of thousands of copies because that's what they are and people know what to expect. For 3 days until retirement, you don't really know what you're getting until you've shelled out $10 for the PDF, or preferably $25 for the hardback, the hardbound print version. The margins are a lot better for me. So the theory of fun was everything, and I decided that really the most fun thing you could be doing was being an absolute, like, property destroying, human rights violating nihilist. Like a cop. Sorry. So the whole idea was that you could be the dude from, you could be Lone Wolf McQuade, the original Texas Ranger movie, which involves a lot of drinking and driving and hitting teenagers and all sorts of stuff, and David Carradine. It involves a lot of ridiculous stuff. The whole idea is that there's this whole gonzo experience, and the gameplay wasn't supposed to get in the way. If someone says, well, yeah, I'm going to jump headfirst through the window and like tackle the stroller that's rolling across the street, you're like, oh, we can do that. Whatever, let's go. And so the theory of fun was that it was this big gonzo thing that was like something that people recognized. I mean, and what I really focused on, because I have a pretty good gaming group, but I have people like Christina here, who has only recently played tabletop games. Sorry, I didn't mention it also for tabletop.
Oh, it's alright, it's
okay. And we have people like my family who, like, I got my dad to say Dungeons & Dragons on the phone recently, and that was exciting and weird. I have all these people that and it's something that I discovered in law school, because a thing that you can learn about law school is that everyone there is like the kid that was bullied in middle school, all of them universally. And they all wanted to play Dungeons & Dragons growing up, but like they didn't get into it for one reason or another. And it was especially true for like people of color and women and the LGBTQ community, because they were already like, they were already kind of on the fringes anyway, and this like weird insular nerd community that they maybe didn't quite fit in was this total barrier, right? And so I wanted to really focus on accessibility. So I was like, okay, well, dragon is a dragon and that's cool, but like, everyone's seen Die Hard, everyone's seen CSI, everyone's seen Miami Vice, or at least has like read a Wikipedia article about it once. Everyone's got this like, we have this great wealth of knowledge about like crazy 80s cop films and car chases and kicking in doors and beating up people while they're handcuffed and just great stuff. And so, and like planting drugs on people. I had a 12-year-old do that during a play test. It's really weird. Kid's gonna go far. So we have this whole accessible, pop culture subject matter that people know and get. And then the other big accessibility matter is like, I say D20 and you guys know what a D20 is. I say D20 in law school and I get made fun of even more than I was already getting made fun of. So I thought, well, like all of 20-sided dice is a probability mechanic. It's another probability mechanic, like playing cards. Playing cards have this really great, complicated, like super strategic amount of probability that you can use. You can do all sorts of things, right? Anyone like, the fact that poker is so successful and people take televised poker really seriously is an indication that like there's a deep strategy and people appreciate that cards can allow you to create these really deep strategies. Plus everyone knows, like this worked out really well, I didn't plan on this. Like everyone knows what this feels like, right? You've got 5 playing cards. You know that the high value beats low. You know that certain combinations of suits are more important. So you can say, I play an ace, fuck you, Mr. Jack. That kind of thing. Like you know what that's like, right? So by taking away the dice, and really, and essentially like the way the video games work, abstracting out the math, because like I don't think anybody really ever thinks about the probabilities behind playing cards, but they know that you're much more likely to get 2 pair than you are 4 of a kind. Like, people already know how that works. So the game is played entirely with playing cards. Every police officer, all the players are police officers, there's a person running the game, it's everyone else. The police officers have a certain number of cards that they can use, and that represents all the cards they have for that day. By the way, 3 Days Until Retirement is a game, I should have explained this, I'm sorry, where every single player is a cop who is 3 days from retiring, and they're trying to solve one last case so that they can get a promotion. So what could go wrong, right? You know, and it plays on the whole cop trope where, like, the cop dies, he's like, oh, he was only 1 day from retirement, oh, it's a tragedy. And it's totally, like, the whole idea is, like, the scheme behind the game is the person who's running the game, they've been tasked by the city to, like, reduce the pension obligation for the police force. And so they're like, going out of their way to, like, kill and discredit police officers. It's really dark. I graduated from college during the recession, I have a lot of bad ideas. But that's the whole point of the game, right? And it's this total dark, sardonic, you know, fun thing that can be played a number of different ways. But you play with playing cards. And the mechanics are usually, there's a high-low pull for all the mechanics. And it's broken broadly into 2 different, there's combat and non-combat. And the whole point behind non-combat is that you use high cards to do more impressive things, right? If you're gonna dodge out of the way of a speeding vehicle, that's an easy thing to do, right? That might be an 8 or a 9. If you want to jump from one card to another while shooting at a third card, which people have done, you can do that. But it's going to be like a king or an ace, right? It's harder to do, and it requires a bigger sacrifice from your part as a player. So you're like, okay, fine. Well, I have these cool high cards. I'll just go ahead and use them. Combat is basically the card game War, where you, the player, have your 13 cards, or however many you have left after you use some of your cards, against a full deck. And so the more high cards you burn during non-combat, the more dangerous combat is for you. Because card margins, you know, if you're the player and you pull a king, and I pull a queen, you beat me by 1 point, like, I've just taken 10 damage. So the more high cards that you lose during non-combat, the more dangerous combat is. And that's like the core theory of fun, is that time is running out, right? You've only got 3 days to do this, you're like an old, beat up, grizzled, kind of slacker cop, and you've got like these quasi-mystical powers in some cases to solve things and do superhuman things, but like, the deck is stacked, the deck is literally stacked against you. And so the whole game is this weird strategy between, well, do I try to save little Timmy from the terrorists, or do I just save these cards and try to kill as many terrorists? And that's the entire theory of fun, is this weird strategy and like playing to your strengths. And so part of this was, part of the development here for this, and part of the reason that I developed the game this way was I knew from being a tabletop gamer, playing a lot of tabletop games, that this particular subject matter was something that people were really excited about. And if you spend a lot of time on the internet, you spend a lot of time watching The Simpsons, you see all these cop tropes, right? This is stuff that you see. This is out there in the collective unconscious. It's jokes we make. You know, if someone says yippee-ki-yo-ki-yay, motherfucker, you're like, ha ha ha, yeah, Hans Gruber, dying. You're like, yeah. So there's this total, like, people have the pop culture thing in their head. Like, they know how to act if they're in that scenario. And people know how playing cards work. But it's new enough relative to dice that the playing cards allow you to really goof off and have fun and explore new things, so it doesn't feel deterministic and old. And that was the whole angle for this game, was developing an accessible, innovative game that would still play to like a core tabletop gaming market. And we're going to talk about the market here in a minute. And I think the other thing that really sold the game, and design matters, is something that's really important. I know we talked about Munchkin earlier, right? Who here has played Munchkin? It's ugly. Is it not like an ugly game? Like, the graphics came out in 1980 or 81. They haven't really been updated. It's like an ugly kind of counterculture cartoon thing. When you compare that to like even stylized graphics in the video games you guys are making, it looks dated and you're just kind of like, whoa, whatever. But style and design are important. And I think that something that has happened in tabletop gaming is there's a captive audience. There are people that are going to buy tabletop games because that's what they like. And it allows you to get a little lazy with the more expensive stuff like art. You can focus on the concept, and if the concept is good, people are going to buy it regardless. Like, I think the design is really important. And I think the design is really important not only because like the tabletop gamers that you're selling to, aren't your market, they're your collaborators. They're the people that are going to sell your game for you. They're the people that are going to be super excited and send you thank you emails because you're giving them something that they want. So it's like, it's a total like thank you to them to give them a product that looks really good, that has really great art, that they can put on a bookshelf and be like, yeah, you know, I bought this game, check out these, like, there's a picture of a police officer with 2 hot dogs trying to fight off a ninja. I paid someone to draw that for me. It's a really, really fantastic piece of art. Part of it's playing into the physicality of the thing, right? If you're selling a video game, and you can totally sell a video game on the merits. You're selling a tabletop game, a significant portion of the tabletop game is the physicality of it. People are buying it because it's a physical product. It's good to look at. It's fun to play around and play. I play Warhammer Fantasy, which has hundreds of little miniatures. And like, I'm not even, I paint them and stuff, but like sometimes when I'm home alone, sorry, Christina, I sit there and like go rah, 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 and like running into each other. And it's real fun. But like the physicality is there, and right, and like Games Workshop has known this for years. Like that's why they keep putting out new cool models. That's why there's like a zombie dragon that's like this big that costs like $300 and people buy it. Like the design, the physical, the beauty of it matters. And so the other big thing I went out of the way was like, you know what, I'm making this game, I'm gonna put it on Kickstarter, the rules are written, I'm gonna pre-sell it. So what I'm really gonna raise money for are printing costs and art. And I'll pay myself out of residual sales later. So I may not make that much money, but at least I put a game out that's cool and beautiful. And so like out of that, I think I raised $9,925, no, I know exactly what I raised. I raised $9,925 on Kickstarter. I ended up paying about $5,000 to the artist. Just like that, and that was like the central selling point in the Kickstarter was, hey, I wrote this game, I think you'll like it, I want to get it printed, I think the art here is really important, and when you're buying into this, you're buying into that idea. And people really, really bought into that idea. And you can tell because I would send out an email about, you know, the next stretch goal is another $1,000 goes to Nikki, the artist. And people would say, like, I would notice a very immediate increase in pledges because people were excited about it. You know, they're excited to fund artists. Everyone knows that being a freelance artist sucks and is precarious and scary. I mean, it's great, but getting paid is the hard part. So they're like, oh wow, you know, I can buy into this game and help pay someone to do what they love. The art is really, really important on tabletop games, and that's something that I know that the Factions game, the guy came in that who developed it as part of the last Game Jam, is this really cool card game where you push and pull cards back and forth. And the art they've been putting out for that, the art they have for it is really captivating, gorgeous art. And I think it's going to go a really long way for them. So that's sort of my ideas on designing a game. Making sure that you know your audience, making sure that you're working to defeat that perceived learning curve, which we talked about. Magic the Gathering does it really well, and really kind of digging outside of the traditional boundaries of fantasy or the traditional boundaries what we think of for a role-playing game, which is something we talked about with obstacles earlier. So do we have any questions?
I think it's really interesting that you decided to use playing cards as your kind of probability method. Are there any other games that have ever like tapped that method before? And so I guess you kind of explained why, but I think it's also interesting that you've done more card games since then. And is it just because you found so much success with 3 Days Until Retirement using card games for that?
So I actually developed a game for the drink up contest that we had. We had to make a game that you could learn in 5 minutes if you were like stupid drunk. I made a card game for it because everyone's played a drinking game involving cards, right? It's called Attack, Defend, Magic. And the whole idea was you played cards in front of you, and there was like kind of a high-low, almost paper, rock, scissors thing where you would go 1, 2, 3, and you would either yell attack, defend, or magic, and the other person would do the same thing, and you would throw cards into it. So there's a lot of throwing and yelling, and you could shotgun beer. So the theory of fun was like, you can shotgun a beer to totally negate what someone just did. The entire theory of fun. It's pretty fun. I don't know, it's a good time. I got really drunk playing it. But yeah, so playing cards are something that I actually did a lot of research on this, trying to figure that out. And what I discovered was there was a guy out in Redmond, Washington, who had a Kickstarter at the same time I did, and it turns out we're part of the same blogging community. We read the same blogs, we play the same games. He was putting out this playing card themed game where you're like basically a weird assassin. And the game might have just been called Assassins. I don't remember. It's called Stab City. Maybe it's Stab City. There's a lot of exclamation points involved, is all I remember. But it's a cool idea, and the whole thing, and it was a total like action playing, like he wanted something rather than the standard like, you kill a goblin, now you move on to a hobgoblin, now you move on to an orc, now you move on to an owlbear. You eventually get the trolls, they regenerate, it sucks. He wanted to go for this really weird experience, and he wanted the play experience to feel like a crazy casino heist, cards everywhere, you know, like stuff just flying thing. And so he made an entire playing card themed game. And really, those are the only two ones that I found that really are pretty exclusive with actual playing cards, like you just need 2 decks of cards. I've seen a few games like Malifaux, which can use playing cards in some weird ways, and there are a few old Westerns. Some of the old versions of like Aces and Eights will sometimes use like a weird poker-like mechanic. But really, playing cards as a probability determinator for this stuff is something that hasn't happened a lot. And I think it's because, like, I honestly don't even know how the mechanics of my game work. Totally roll some d20s. And she's like, okay, son, let's smoke a bowl first. That's if your mom's into role-playing games. My mom's not into role-playing. Sorry, Mom. But yeah, like, I mean, you can always, like, Grandma's playing Canasta already, and she knows how playing cards work. You can totally sit down with her and be like, hey, well, let's do this thing instead where we're gunfighters, right? And we're just gonna goof off, and there'll be a gunfight, and we're gonna put together poker hands, and that's gonna be how this works. So I like the idea of playing cards as a mechanic, and I like exploring it. And I think that it produces a different feel for play because people are familiar with it in weird ways that they're not familiar with other tabletop games. And I think that it can kind of create some really unique scenarios for probabilities, because the probabilities aren't a simple, like, if you have a d6, you have a 16.66667% chance of rolling a 1, and that's bad, or a similar chance of rolling a 6, and that's good. You would still have 13 cards, which could be any number of 52 cards, and the combinations of them and what other people have, and what's been played and what hasn't been played, and what you think is going to be played all matter. There's an incredibly deeper level of strategy that when you combine with like actual role-playing, gives a tremendous amount of agency to the player in terms of creating stories and creating fun, essentially. And I think there's a lot of good stuff there. So, I totally recommend other people get in on this playing card thing. It's a real, if you come up with a real good playing card mechanic, I guarantee you can sell some games. Yes?
You were mentioning about playtesting. What do you think was the best resource to go to get playtesters? I imagine things like this, but if there's anything else. And how many playtesting did you do before you felt like your game was complete and ready to prosecute it?
Okay. So the development timeline for this game was really weird. I was running a 3.5 campaign, and I was in the Temple of Elemental Evil, which some of you are probably familiar with, and my players killed a low-level guard, and as a joke, as the guard died, I just said, 3 days until retirement, and everyone laughed, because everyone's really drunk, because the joke wasn't that funny, and I was like, wouldn't it be great if there was a game where you were a cop, and you had 3 days until retirement, and everyone laughed again, because I'm the DM, and I'll just kill them if they don't constantly get by every win. That's not entirely true. The game came out of this like one sentence, you know, and I was like, ha, cool, whatever. And I didn't think about it for a while. I did other stuff, like get a job, pass the bar. And then like I was sitting at work daydreaming, as many of you do. And I was like, hey, I can use playing cards for this. And then I like wrote the main body of the game in like 10 hours. It was like batshit crazy 10 hours of like typing as fast as I can. And then I read the rules and I was like, well, this is kind of garbage. So this doesn't make sense. I was like, okay, well, we're gonna sit on this. And I was kind of explaining it to friends at this point, and they were like, oh, this is kind of cool, you know, this is great. And then I was going on some really long bike rides at the time, and I was on this really long bike ride, and I was like, wait a minute, what if we did it this way, and we did this stuff? And so I really actually had a pretty solid version of the rules before we ever got to playtesting. And I think that can actually be pretty important, is to really have your theory of fun and have mechanics that you think add to that theory of fun before you do anything else. And then we went into playtesting with friends. And I'm fortunate to have friends that are now all over the country that are also huge nerds that were willing to playtest it for me. And they sent me notes and said, okay, well this dragged, this was slow, this was fun, this part really worked well, this part of the game ran too long. And that's when I started whittling away. And the idea is that you have this theory of fun, and you build rules around this theory of fun. And then you start playtesting and you start cutting stuff off. Because like you should never be like writing to fill something out so you can sell it. You should be trimming stuff so that you can sell it. And so we started playtesting in March of 2013, and I launched the Kickstarter in late September of 2013. And the idea behind the Kickstarter was if you backed you immediately got a beta test of the rules. You got an art-free beta version of the rules as they were written right then that you could goof around with and play test. And what ended up happening out of the Kickstarter was people really started sending me pretty good feedback. And some of it was like so-so, and some of it like, you get a lot of feedback, people that do video games know like, well, what if we also added Cthulhu? And you're like, I mean, yeah. Like, what about zombies? What about steampunk Nazi zombies? They're also robots. Steam robots. And you're like, it's cops on the edge. So, but I mean, you know, like, it evinces an excitement about the world you're building. It evinces buy-in, which is good. But the actual playtesting, I ran, I don't know how many playtests. Probably the most, honestly, outside of the meetup groups and the IGDA, call Wizards Wagon. Wizards Wagon will let you demo games all day long. They love it. They'll advertise it for you. They'll find people. But actually, I was at Atomic Cowboy last night, and the bartender looked super familiar, and I couldn't realize why. And he probably didn't realize it either. It was one of the playtesters from a public playtest of the game. And he had this whole thing where like he had this character trait where he was called Death Wish. He had to kill any criminal he encountered. Had to chase them down to death. And so he's chasing this bike messenger that's like run a red light or something. And he's like got the guy's cell phone number, and he's texting the kid, like the bike messenger, and he's like, pull over. And I was like, okay, well the kid asks you where's the warrant. He's like, I Instagram him a photo of my gun. And he kept doing this thing every time when he would like get ready to take an action, he would just go. And I didn't realize if he'd just done it last night when he was selling me a beer, I would have been like, whoa! But yeah, like the ultimate like playtesting thing really is like your friendly local game shop. And we're probably running way over time. I'm a really big happy talker, sorry. We'll talk really briefly about marketing and selling a tabletop game, but your local game shop is really the absolute best resource you have for this sort of thing, aside of course from the St. Louis chapter of the International Game Development Association. Do we have any other questions? You're welcome. All right, well, let's move on really quickly to marketing and selling. Kickstarter is obviously the 800-pound gorilla, right? Everyone's going to run a Kickstarter. I have some problems with that as a game developer. Because while it's a little bit different for tabletop gaming than for video games, because video games do have a broader appeal, which is fantastic and great, and it's amazing. I love the fact that video games have gotten so popular. Tabletop gaming has remained a relatively hardcore niche. And so what happens is these people are so excited that you are also a tabletop gamer and that you want to make something for them and like make something fun and exciting and new for them, that they're totally on your side before you do anything else, right? You're part of this group. And I think that every Kickstarter that runs, that isn't run well, that doesn't treat the people that back the Kickstarter with respect, and that fails to deliver on its promises, kind of hurts other game developers. I funded something called Unwritten, that which happened by Roxloo Games, which is a cool idea for a video game. It's really awesome. I'm super excited about it. And they had a variety of really bad problems and setbacks, and the standard, you know, your eyes are bigger than your stomach. We're going to do all this cool, you know, a truly immersive 3D environment kind of shit. Serialized content. They had this whole idea and it totally folded. And it was a total disappointment, not only because I wanted to play the game, but because I was like, man, this thing folded. And it happens a lot. It happens a lot in the tabletop gaming community on Kickstarter as well, where people promise the moon and then just never follow through, and they feel like they're not accountable for it. And I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's fair to the people that have backed the product. It's not fair to the people that have bought into the dream that you're selling them, because again, with the dreaming metaphor, you're dreaming something, and they're so excited about it, they're giving you money before you put anything in their hands. It's a total betrayal of confidence, and it's a betrayal of confidence for your fellow game developers. So, when I set out for the Kickstarter, I had estimated that at $3,000 I could put a certain amount of art in the game, I could print the thing, and I could basically come out flat, you know, and then I would have a game that was written and had art and published, and I could sell it other ways, and we'll talk about other ways to sell stuff tabletop in a little bit. And so the idea was like, and I did not want to run the Kickstarter, and this was kind of coming back to the question you asked earlier, I didn't want to run the Kickstarter until I had something physical that I could show the people that were backing. And so I was like, okay, well I have beta rules that I've run the game several times through with these beta rules, and the general consensus is that there's about close to what the finished game is going to be, but there's some room for expansion and improvement. And the second you back the game, you get the rules. You just do. Like you've already, like the whole idea was, I treated it like basically an excellent marketing platform where I could pre-sell games. And that's exactly what I did. And so what's ended up happening is like, I pre-sold the games, people got the rules, people have gotten iterations of the rules as they've changed. And basically, as art has come in and I've been putting together the editing, I'm actually getting the proof copy in tomorrow for the game, so it's going to go out right on deadline. I'm proud of that. The whole idea behind it was like, you're not buying into this project as like something that will happen eventually. You're buying into it because you want the fucking game. You want the game, you want it as soon as possible, and you want it to be awesome, and you know that the more money that goes into it, the more awesome it's going to be. And so, I was actually, I was on the phone the other day with someone, and I had a crazy idea for this game as a card game, not a playing card game, but a trading card game. But the whole theory of fun is like, you know, what's the least fun thing about role-playing games? Managing encumbrance. What's in your backpack, right? How heavy is it? Etc. So I came up with this idea for a game called Beasts of Burden, where the entire game is like you have objects in your backpack that you have to keep shuffling and trading to do stuff, and it's heavy and you can't carry too much stuff. But like, I had this idea for this game, I was like, cool, I can run a Kickstarter for this. And I was like, well, or I can play this all the way out, we can get a final version of the game, I can contract for the art, people can immediately download a print and play version for the game, and we're not gonna run it until the other thing is done. And I think that Kickstarter is the most important tool right now for us as developers, even more important than Steam, because it's not just a way for you to raise money, even though raising money is great, it's the ultimate marketing platform. And it's the ultimate way for you to communicate with people that are more than just the purchase of your products. They're your fans and your collaborators. And it really should be a collaborative process based on respect. You know, like I've gotten great ideas for 3 Days Until Retirement. I've gotten great ideas for future expansions to the game. And it's totally, I think, because people understand that it's not just, and really there's no like, if you're an indie game developer, it's never like you're selling a game, right? You're selling your idea. You're selling you as this shiny, smart creature. Right? It's totally like, you're not selling copies of games, you're making friends. You're making friends that will hopefully buy more of your game. And it's totally about building a community and showing respect for your audience and respect for the people that like, I mean, you're not making a video game because you hate the people that are going to play it, unless you're the dude that makes Dwarf Fortress. I love Dwarf Fortress, by the way. I'm super into roguelikes. It's like the worst, most abusive time. I get like really depressed and play roguelikes for like 72 hours straight. It's disgusting. But that's totally what Kickstarter is for. Kickstarter is a way to raise money, but it's a social networking platform. It allows someone to send you $200, and you can send them a personal thank you note, and they'll send you something back. And you can have a conversation with them that costs you like 10 seconds a day, maybe. And they're like, whoa, this person that made this game that I backed is totally talking to me. This is awesome. You just made that person's day 10,000 times better. What are they going to do? They're going to talk about your game to other people. They're going to think that great for whatever reason. They're going to overlook it a little bit because they've bought into you as a person and not just you as a game. So I think that's where Kickstarter really comes in from a marketing games, especially from tabletop games, because tabletop games are very niche. The people that do it have money to spend now, they have a lot of time, and they are very, very, very excited to get new products. New products that don't treat them like a market, but treat them like people that want to play fun games. And then the other selling stuff is kind of interesting, because like Steam is obviously the big thing for video games. For tabletop games, because it's so physical, you have an inventory management problem. Like I'm about to have like 300 print copies of this 160-page book laying around my living room. I've got 900 koozies sitting in my living room right now. I just thought it was like weird. My roommate totally thinks I'm the weirdest human being alive. It's great. I have this like big inventory problem, and like the really big thing here is like I can sell through the Kickstarter stuff, and it was great to do that. But like I've got to figure out how to get stuff into stores because that's where it's sold, and that's where running playtests at the friendly local game store comes in. That's where meeting game distributors comes in because distributors are going to do stuff for you, and they're going to take a cut, obviously, which is what they do. But that's sort of the way it works. Like you're selling a physical product, so you have to deal with physical inventory, which reduces your margins. It makes it way more of a labor of love, which is a good thing to remember, I think. But the other really exciting thing is we have us tabletop gamers have a Steam of our own now. It's One Bookshelf. Is anyone familiar with One Bookshelf? Or Drive-Through RPG, Drive-Through Fiction, Drive-Through Cards, RPG Now. Right, that's all One Bookshelf. It's a digital publishing platform that is basically a way for you to sell electronic versions of your products, and increasingly a way for you to sell print and play versions of your products. You can put out a trading card game like the one you're making on One Bookshelf, and someone can buy a print and play version of that game, and you never have to touch a physical copy of it. And you get 65% of the net, which is a huge margin relative to how physical stuff usually works. So I think that I'll break for a Q&A here really quick about marketing and selling. Some questions, and we'll right into we'll kind of go into just a general discussion for the future of gaming. But I think that like a combination of Kickstarter as a marketing platform and a way to connect creatives, combined with Panda and some of the other ways that you can produce games really quickly, as well as print-on-demand technology, is opening up tabletop gaming to a really big new audience, and it's allowing people to get really new, creative, exciting, edgy ideas out there that you couldn't do before, because it changes the profitability of doing it. And so, do we have any questions? Yes?
How far along do you think the game should be before we launch it on Kickstarter? So an idea versus a prototype versus 98% of the average people.
Right. That's a great question. The question was, if you couldn't hear it, how far along should your game be before you put it on Kickstarter? And I think there might be a difference here between tabletop games and video games, because a tabletop game timeline is way different, and like the work is way different. And so I think that for tabletop games at least, you should have a product that you would be willing to set down in front of someone and expect them to give you money for. And it could be a banker, it could be a mom, it could be a parent or a sibling or a rich friend if you want them to give you some money to like invest in the product. I mean, it should be something, it's like starting up any company, right? You don't just start up a company and say, hey, I have this idea, give me money, right? I mean, it's cool that you can do that, but it doesn't generally work unless you're selling drugs. But you have to have a business plan, right? You have to say, here, I've thought through this is my theory behind why this works, here's all the work I've already put into it, here's why the numbers make sense. I'm going to set this in front of you, you can see how the idea works, now I want you to give me money. I think it should work the same way for games. So if you have a tabletop game, if you have any sort of game that is, that you think has legs and people will like and have fun, build it up. Build it to a point that like you could sit down with your people, your friends, your drinking buddies, people you game with normally, and you could explain it to them and you guys could play it for an hour and they would say, this is really fun. Bring it to IGDA, run it there. And if people are like, yeah, this is great, I'm super bought in, then get ready and do a Kickstarter for it. And then the exciting thing about being at that phase where like you have something that you would be willing to show people is you can get a lot of feedback, which is the most important thing you can get. Like feedback from customers, they've already paid for it, and they're giving you feedback on your product before they've received it. You're gonna get a lot of 5-star reviews, right? After you get them the finished product, if you've already incorporated the feedback they've given you. Like, that's a really cool idea, is it not? It's kind of the same way that you do open beta for video games. You know, the idea is that like the feedback you're getting makes the open product, the finished end product, that much more valuable. And so I think not having the art, or all of the art, like having an idea of what you want the game to look like, and the art and the design for the game, and having an idea of theory of fun and the rules that are built around it, and having an idea of the stuff that you can add on if people want it. Once you're there, what you're really doing is you're setting it in front of someone and saying, okay, tell me what you want, tell me what you think. And they're like, this is great, I'm gonna give you money, here's what I think. And you're like, cool, I'll build this in. By the way, I just made up these extras. And they're like, cool, I'll give you more money. And they're like, wow, this is easy. It's a good feeling. Yes?
Do you ever consider approaching publishers creatives at Kickstarter?
So do I ever consider approaching publishers instead of running a Kickstarter?
Yeah, or did you run a Kickstarter?
I'm one of those total jerks that hates having a boss. And so I didn't really consider a publisher. Because I mean, at this point, like, we have the internet. We have print-on-demand technology. Why not start your own publishing house? I bought 10 ISBNs for $250 the other day, and I've got 5 products in a pipeline that need an ISBN. Like, I'm now a publisher. I'm a game developer and a publisher. If you guys want to publish games, we'll work up something. I promise, even though I hate having bosses, I'm probably an okay boss. Maybe. Anyway. I didn't, like, at this point, like, it costs you $50 to set up an LLC. And it costs you nothing to write a game aside from your own time. And with a Kickstarter, you can get the thing up and you can prepay for all of your publishing costs. So why let someone else take a cut? Kickstarter's gonna take 5%, Amazon's gonna take 5%. But like the marketing services you've gotten out of that, the fact that like there's a rabid online community for tabletop games on Kickstarter, and that they give you tools to really boost your sales, that's worth 10%. The fact that you don't have to deal with credit card processing, that's worth, you know, however much percent. Like, it's totally worth it. So I think that, and I think that publishers, especially now, are a little weary of publishing new things. If you go, like, cause I looked into like maybe writing some content for Goodman Games or Steve Jackson Games, because I do some other game stuff. And they have pretty strict requirements, and they don't often solicit new stuff because they don't want to be considered, they don't want people to think that they've stolen ideas from someone. It's the standard, like, I can't send my rap album to Nelly. Nelly's not gonna listen to it. Because like, Nelly's gonna put out his next hit and I'm gonna be like, that was me. I did that beat. I did. I'm deaf. But yeah, so I think that approaching publishers is a really cool thing to do at a certain point. But I think that like, Kickstarter allows you to put together a really DIY proof of concept where you're like, hey, I made this finished product. And like, I don't know, I sold 600 copies of it. If you guys are interested in maybe doing a bigger print run and picking up the tab for it, maybe. You know, maybe. And then like approaching a publisher after you've done the Kickstarter and published something, I think gives you a little more leverage. So, any other questions? Yes.
Quick one. You mentioned IGDAs. On the logistics side, like I can imagine inventory becoming kind of a pain in the butt. Like you said, labor of love, but also kind of a thing. Have you done any research into like third-party logistics stuff?
I have.
Have you found anything interesting? Like,
I have found the most interesting thing in the world. Seriously, so I have been going out and like, I do a lot of small business law work. So I meet with a lot of people that have small businesses and we talk about stuff. And I do some consulting stuff. And so I met with a guy, and like at first we weren't sure why we had met. So I'm working on like 5 different things. One of them is the game company. He's working on like 5 different things. It turns out he started the Belagara, the Washi chapter of Belagara back in the day. And primarily as a way to meet girls, believe it or not. Belagara is medieval combat right? It worked. He met his wife at the first Belagara meeting, which was awesome. But we're talking, and like suddenly we both kind of say tabletop game at the same time. And he was like, I was like, yeah, you know, I'm doing this thing. I ran a Kickstarter. It's pretty cool, you know, thinking I was like hot shit. And he was like, yeah, I make Sentinels of the Multiverse, which is like the superhero card game that's selling like, you know, like 10,000 copies a month or something. And I was like, oh. So he starts talking to me, and he's like really excited about tabletop gaming, and he's excited to be in St. Louis, and he's excited to work on this stuff. He's, for whatever reason, excited about negotiating commercial real estate leases. This is the words that came out of his mouth. And we were like on our first beer, not even like our 5th at that point. And he says, yeah, you know, we have this huge, like, I don't even remember, it's like 7,700 square foot warehouse out at Page and 170 where we have our game company where we do all our stuff, and we have a warehouse for a lot of shipping product, and we have extra warehouse space. And you can ship a pallet of your product to our warehouse, and we'll hold it at $10 a month per pallet. And we get a lot of orders from game stores around the world, and we're happy to include your product on like a list of stuff we have in our warehouse, and we'll take a small cut. So yes, in St. Louis, you can pay $10 a month to get a pallet of your games into a warehouse where they'll do some of the distribution work for you. So yeah, it's a very exciting thing.
Nice. How do I find this?
It's called Greater Than Games. And Paul Bender, if you end up watching this, you're welcome. Paul Bender, in Greater Than Games, they call it Sentinels of the Multiverse, which is a fantastic collaborative superhero card game. Really fantastic, a lot of fun. And it's also a really good example of like seeing people interact with fans in a really good way. Yeah, Greater Than Games will totally work with you on distribution stuff if distribution is the hurdle you're facing. So, yes, sir.
I know we're running low on time, so we have to talk to you about this, but one of my biggest problems is taking an idea and turning it into an actual product with the graphics and everything else, because sometimes dealing with graphic designers is tough. So when you find new graphic designers or build it, I'm wondering what your experience has been like. Do you know any companies that actually take the idea and they bring it all the way to the product?
Well, I mean, there's a St. Louis game publishing company called Alex and Dumb Games that can do that for you. I mean, seriously, like we could totally figure something out on that. But yeah, so I know that artists, finding artists and figuring out what to pay artists and figuring out how all that works, and most of you guys have done freelance stuff, freelance app development stuff, right? You know how frustrating that is. Artists have the same problems. So figuring out how to talk to them. I got super fortunate because I'm on the Something Awful forums. And I've been on Something Awful forums for a million years. They have a very vibrant art community on there of like freelance artists. And I paid someone to design Not the Burning Car, this other tattoo up here for me, like years ago, like 2004. And she did it, and it was wonderful. And I loved the art, and I kind of followed her a little bit, like kept up with her on the internet forums. And I was like, I made this game, and like, she draws all this like really crazy, like R-Crumb style cartoon shit. I bet she'd love to draw some cops like, you know, like running away, like getting swarmed by cats or anything like that. And so I started talking to her, and we came up with this great arrangement where she was like, yeah, I'm totally like, I just left my job to be a freelance artist. You know, we're gonna do this. And so it's been a bit of a process because we're not in the same place. It's total telecommunication, but it's worked out really well. I was able to pay her a very livable wage for the work she's done. She's put together have an absolutely outstanding portfolio of art, people that have seen the art, and game art you don't see. And it's a huge selling point for the game, and the cover is outstanding. Nobody's seen the cover yet except me and my dog. My dog's colorblind, so she's not colorblind. Yeah, but so like working with artists, I think it's going to come way down to personal connections. And it's like everyone tells you to network, which is like, it's important. Networking is important, but like networking for networking's sake is you network because like you're a human being, right? We're social creatures. We're talking about game development because we love creating things for other people to goof around with. We love that interaction. You're networking for that. You're finding people that are excited in what you're doing. You're finding people that you'd be excited at what they're doing. Like start going to arts, arts things. There are plenty of artists that would love to have any sort of an illustrating gig where they can like say, yeah, here's my curriculum vitae, here's my portfolio. Oh, by the way, I illustrated this thing. Whatever, I did this. This is me. Pay me more money. Not to you, to the next client. So I think that working with artists is something that requires a lot of like developing a friendly relationship before you develop a working relationship. So it's like, like if the artist cares about you as a person, you care about the artist as a person before you care about whether or not they're turning their art on time, like it totally smooths out a lot of the weird difficulties you have in like contractor or subcontractor relationships. And I think that's really, really important. And I think that St. Louis has some really good art stuff going on right now. There's a group that meets in Maplewood that's like comic book artists. The guy that did that Book of Da, really amazing hardback book that's like nothing but art about under the sea, like a mythical under the sea world. There's a group of people that get together to do comic book art illustration like once a week or once every 2 weeks, and they just sit around in this coffee shop and talk to each other and like ink comic stuff. And they would love to work on whatever it is you want to work on. So yeah, there's plenty of opportunities. The other big thing is like, don't be a skinhead. Like, your idea might be great, like your game idea might be great, but it's also a book. I mean, it's a fucking book full of rules and numbers, and like, I mean, the art is selling it like you might sell it at the end of the day because your rules are so good and your concept is so good. Like the art at the beginning, the art is selling people at the beginning of the day. Without good art, people aren't going to click on it. I mean, that's so do not be a jerk, and do not try to cheap out on art. Like, pay the people a living wage. They get, artists and humanities people get beat up all the time. They shouldn't get it from us. Any other questions? Yes?
What was the most difficult thing about running the Kickstarter in
So it was a huge time commitment. And like, that's something that you hear, is that it's a huge time commitment. And I hadn't really thought through it. I still had a full-time job at the time. And yeah, it was probably during the first week and the last week, it was a couple of hours a day, like talking to people and coordinating things and trying to get press. But like, I think the biggest obstacle to that is to realize that it's not a hassle on your end to deal with the Kickstarter. It's the best way for you to like convey to people what you're doing and the beauty and intelligence behind what you're doing. And it's a really great way to show the people that are willing to put money up for something before they've seen it, that you appreciate them as human beings and you appreciate their input. And so it's totally just like an investment in human capital, so to speak. And so really the obstacle isn't that you're having to find time to do this Kickstarter at the expense of other things. The obstacle is that you need to be able to structure your life so that you can pay enough attention to the Kickstarter. Like, it's not just something where you cynically throw it up and expect to raise, your goal of $20,000 or whatever. Like, you set it up, and the work you put in readily manifests in the amount of money and excitement and the amount of hype that you're getting out of Kickstarter. And so it's just viewing things a different way, viewing things as an opportunity rather than an obstacle. And I think probably the other big thing is like, I think people should start their Kickstarters like, not the Kickstarter, but start the press work, start developing contacts in communities, at least 2 or 3 months before the Kickstarters. The more that you can reach out to the press, and there's some good press out there. There are people that are really, really excited to talk about gaming, especially if you're doing really unique things. And the press that you can get from there, and the more that you can talk to people on the internet and your various internet communities, whatever you're using, and get them excited about what you're doing. So if it's something that they've gotten to see the rules, they've gotten to goof around, that they've gotten to form their own opinions about it outside of your sales pitch, by the time the Kickstarter comes around, they're like, oh yeah, I remember talking to Carol 2 months ago, this concept where they have this, like, all of the art is physical is a really great idea, and it's something that's not being done, and it's amazing. Like, we're going to tell people about this. And it's, I don't know, that's like probably the thing that people don't think of. They think of a Kickstarter as a discrete entity, when really it's part of your game development process. And it's this step, it's your debutante's ball, except you don't have to wear a dress unless you want to. That's pretty fun. So yeah. Other questions? Okay, well thank you so much for listening to me yammer on and on and on. I hope it was fun and exciting. And
actually, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. You mentioned press contacts and things. Is that the sort of thing that you have contacts? And if somebody was interested in getting started, like with a Kickstarter,
most
you would be willing to do some introductions?
Yeah, I would be happy to do some press introductions for anyone who's doing Kickstarters. And I'm also happy to provide some information on how press releases work and how press releases should be timed and the way that you should communicate with media, because it's a learned skill. And it's a hard thing, and I think a lot of us in here, you know, we're creative types, we're technical types, and we view communication as communication, right? Like, oh yeah, well I sent them an email, they got it, they read it, like, they should be doing this. But no, like, reporters get that shit all the time. Like, I used to be a professional environmentalist, and like, if you think getting a newspaper story about, like, your game is hard, trying to get a newspaper story about the fucking environment. Good luck, especially in a town where the 2 largest coal companies in the world are headquartered here. Good luck, it's hard. But there's totally a thing. Like, the science reporter at St. Louis Public Radio, Veronique Lecapra, like, is half French. I used to send her thank you notes in French after she covered our stories. I think she thought I was hitting on her, and I really wasn't. But, you know, it was a sweet thing to do. It was a reminder, you know, and it's just like talking to the people that fund your stuff on Kickstarter, right? They're human beings. And, like, they're going to cover your products, your stories, because they think it's interesting, because they think you're interesting, because they think you're a nice, cool person, and they want to be your friend, so to speak. And so there's a huge whole press thing that I'm more than happy to talk to people about. I'm more than happy to help people with technical writing for press releases, because it's an art. And I'm more than happy to provide press contacts. I think that the people in this room are among the most creative, interesting people that I've met ever. And I think having seen a lot of the projects you guys are working on, it fills me with, like, excitement for the future of gaming, which I think gaming is an important social thing. And I think gaming is a really important part of our culture. And I'm so excited that's going on in St. Louis, and I'm so excited that people are getting together to do something like this. So any way I can help you guys out, I would love it. So do you have any other questions? Wes, announcements?
Yeah, I'd say that.
Great. Well, thank you very much for listening to me. Have a wonderful evening.